Valkyrie warriors dropped through the hole in the ceiling like angels of death. Their weapons blazed with energy as they fell upon the Krithax with the fury of a species protecting its future. At their head was Empress Sirith herself, her purple scales now stained with the green blood of her enemies, her eyes burning with a fire that could consume worlds. The battle was over in seconds. The Krithax who had been about to kill Daniel were cut down where they stood. More warriors poured in behind the Empress, securing the room and checking for additional threats. But Sirith had eyes only for her son. She crossed the room in 3 great strides and pulled Korvax into her arms. It was not a gentle embrace. Valkyrie did not do gentle, but there was something fierce and protective in the way she held him, something that spoke of a love she had never been taught to express. "You are safe," she said, her voice rough. "You are alive because of Daniel." Korvax pulled back just enough to look at his mother's face. "He protected me the whole way. He fought for me even though he had no weapons. He stood between me and the Krithax when they broke through the door. He was ready to die for me, Mother. A human was ready to die for me." The Empress turned to look at Daniel. He was still standing in the same spot, his human body trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. There was a cut on his forehead where debris had struck him, and his clothes were torn and stained with smoke. He looked exactly like what he was, a soft, fragile creature who had no business surviving a battle against the most dangerous species in the galaxy. But he had survived. More than that, he had protected the heir of the Valkyrie Dominion through hours of chaos and death, using nothing but his wits and his stubborn refusal to give up. He had done what trained warriors had failed to do. "The battle?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "Did we win?" "We did." The Empress released her son and approached Daniel slowly. Her warriors parted to let her pass. "The Krithax fleet has been destroyed. Their boarding parties have been eliminated. The flagship is damaged but intact. We have won a great victory today. I am glad. Are you?" Sirith studied him with those golden eyes that had made emperors tremble. "You nearly died saving a child who is not your species, not your responsibility, nothing to you at all. And all you have to say is that you are glad we won?" Daniel managed a tired smile. "Your son is a good kid. He deserves to grow up." That seemed worth fighting for. The Empress was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that made every Valkyrie in the room freeze with shock. She lowered her head to Daniel in a bow of respect. It was not a deep bow, just a slight inclination. But among the Valkyrie, it was a gesture reserved for the greatest warriors, those who have proven themselves through acts of extraordinary courage. "You have saved the future of my people," Sirith said as she raised her head. "You have earned a debt that I can never fully repay, but I will try." She turned to address the assembled warriors. "Hear me now. This human, Daniel Cooper, has shown more courage tonight than many who call themselves warriors. He protected the heir when others could not. He stood firm when others would have fled. From this day forward, he's no longer a lowly liaison. He's a royal advisor and guardian to Prince Korvax, with all the rights and honors that position carries." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some scales showed surprise. Others showed something that might have been approval. One set of scales, belonging to Commander Draxus, showed barely contained fury. But no one dared to speak against the Empress. Korvax ran to Daniel and grabbed his hand. "You are staying. You are really staying." "It seems like I am." Daniel squeezed the small claws gently. "Are you okay with that?" "I have never been more okay with anything in my life." The following weeks brought changes that no one could have predicted. Daniel moved into new quarters in the royal section of the ship, quarters that were warm and comfortable and had actual furniture size for humans. He spent his days with Korvax, continuing their lessons but now openly. Without need for secrecy or shame. The prince flourished. His combat training improved not because he was pushed harder, but because he finally understood why strength mattered. He wanted to protect people, like Daniel had protected him. He wanted to be the kind of leader who defended the weak instead of crushing them. His tutors were baffled by the change, but they could not argue with results. Commander Draxus was quietly transferred to a distant outpost. No one spoke of him again, but the most surprising change came from the Empress herself. She began visiting during Daniel's lessons, at first just observing, then asking questions. She wanted to understand how humans raise their young. She wanted to know why kindness seemed to work better than cruelty. She did not accept everything Daniel told her. She was still Velthory, still a warrior, still a ruler who had built her power on strength and fear. But she was willing to listen. And that was a start. One evening, as Daniel was teaching Korvax how to play catch with a ball he had made from spare parts, Cirith came to watch. She stood in the doorway for a long time, her scales shifting through colors that Daniel had never seen from her before. "He has never looked like this," she said quietly. "So alive, so happy. I did not know he could be this way." "All children can be this way," Daniel replied, tossing the ball to Korvax, who caught it with a laugh. "They just need someone to show them it is allowed. We have raised our young the same way for 6,000 years. We believed it made them strong. Maybe it did. But strong and happy are not the same thing. And I think, in the long run, happy warriors fight harder than scared ones." The Empress watched her son throw the ball back to Daniel. Watched the joy on his small face. Watched the easy trust between the human and the Heir. And for the first time in her long life, she wondered if everything she had been taught about strength was wrong. "Teach me," she said finally. "Teach me how you do this." Daniel caught the ball and turned to face the ruler of the Velthory Dominion. "Are you sure? It might change everything you believe about how things should be. My son stood between me and a human to protect someone he loved. He defied his mother, his culture, his entire people, because you showed him something worth believing in." Cirith's scales settled on a color Daniel had never seen from her before. Something soft. Something vulnerable. If that is what human teaching can do, then I want to understand it, even if it changes everything. Daniel smiled and held out the ball. "Then let us start with something simple. Catch." The Empress of the Velthory Dominion caught the ball with clumsy claws. Her son laughed at her fumbling attempt, and after a moment of shock, she laughed too. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed and strange. But it was real Dot and watching from the observation deck, with the stars stretching out before them in infinite possibility. Daniel Cooper thought about all the bridges he had dreamed of building when he first left Earth. He had wanted to connect worlds, to help species understand each other, to prove that humanity had something valuable to offer the galaxy. He had not expected to do it by teaching an alien Empress how to play catch, but sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest moments. Sometimes one act of kindness could reshape the fate of an empire. And sometimes a former schoolteacher from a small town in Ohio could remind an entire civilization that even in the darkest void, there was always room for a little light. The galaxy would learn, in time, that humans were not remarkable for their strength or their technology. They were remarkable for their stubborn belief that every child deserved to laugh, every heart deserved kindness, and every wall could be brought down by someone brave enough to try. And it all started with a simple question and a warm cup of broth, offered freely to a frightened child hiding in the shadows. The Krithaks were nightmares given form. Daniel had read about them in his studies, but nothing had prepared him for seeing them in person. They were insectoid creatures, standing on four legs with two additional limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Their bodies were covered in black chitin that absorbed light, and their compound eyes glowed a sickly green. They moved in perfect coordination, Like a single mind controlling thousands of bodies. They had been at war with the Valkyrie for generations. No peace had ever been signed. No treaty had ever held. The two species fought until one side retreated, then prepared for the next battle. It was an endless cycle of death that had consumed countless worlds. And now they were here, aboard the flagship, hunting the air. The first wave of boarding pods had punched through the ship's hull in a dozen places. Krithak's soldiers poured into the corridors, cutting down anyone in their path. The Valkyrie fought back with savage fury, but the attack had come so fast and so hard that entire sections of the ship were already lost. In the war chamber, Empress Sirith took command with cold efficiency. Her voice cut through the chaos as she directed her forces, coordinated counterattacks, and struggled to regain control of her dying ship. But even as she fought the battle that would determine the fate of her people, part of her mind was on her son. The route to the royal bunker has been compromised, one of her officers reported, his scales pale with fear. Krithak's forces are between the prince and the secure zone. We cannot get him through. The Empress's claws dug into the arm of her command chair. Her son was in danger. Her only child. The future of her entire civilization. And she could not reach him. I will take him. Every head turned to look at Daniel. He stood at the edge of the chamber, forgotten in the chaos until now. His human face showed no fear, only calm determination. I know the forgotten sections of this ship, Daniel continued. I have walked those corridors every day for weeks. I can get the prince to safety through paths the Krithaks will not expect. Commander Draxus laughed harshly. You expect us to trust the heir's life to a soft little human who has never held a weapon. You would die in the first minute. Maybe, Daniel admitted. But I will not stop trying until I am dead. Can you say the same, Commander? Before Draxus could respond, Korvax spoke up. He had been standing near the back of the chamber, surrounded by guards who had no idea how to protect him. Now he pushed forward, his scales showing that bright blue color that Daniel knew so well. I trust Daniel with my life, the prince said firmly. He has protected me when no one else would. He has taught me when everyone else only punished me. If anyone can get me to safety, it is him. The Empress looked at her son. She looked at Daniel. She thought of all the things she had believed about humans. They were weak. They were soft. They were barely worth noticing. But this one human had done something that thousands of Volturi trainers and guards had failed to do. He had reached her son. He had helped him grow stronger. Thought maybe weakness was not always what it appeared to be. Go, she said finally. Protect my son, human. And if you let him die, I will hunt you across every star in this galaxy. Daniel nodded. I understand, Your Majesty. He held out his hand to Korvax. The prince took it without hesitation, wrapping his small claws around Daniel's fingers. Together, they ran from the war chamber into the burning corridors beyond. The journey was a nightmare. Smoke filled the air. Emergency lights cast everything in shades of red. The sound of weapons fire echoed from every direction. Daniel navigated by memory, leading Korvax through maintenance tunnels and storage rooms that the main crew never used. The Krithaks had not found these paths yet, but Daniel knew it was only a matter of time. They had been running for nearly an hour when they turned a corner and found their path blocked. 3 Krithak soldiers stood in the corridor ahead, their compound eyes glowing in the darkness. They had not seen Daniel and Korvax yet, but they would in seconds. Daniel pulled Korvax back around the corner and pressed them both against the wall. His mind raced through options. He had no weapon. He had no armor. He was facing creatures designed for killing, and he was nothing but a former schoolteacher from Ohio. But he had something the critics did not expect. He had a brain that had spent years solving problems that seemed impossible. And he had a child counting on him. Stay here, Daniel whispered to Korvax. Do not move until I call for you. What are you going to do? Daniel smiled despite everything. I am going to teach. He stepped out into the corridor and started walking toward the Krithak soldiers. Not running, not fighting, just walking, with his hands raised and his voice loud and calm. Hey there. I think you might be lost. The important parts of the ship are that way. The Krithaks turned toward him, confused by this strange behavior. Their programming told them to kill threats. But this small, soft creature did not look like a threat. It was not running. It was not fighting. It was just talking. While they hesitated, Daniel kept moving, drawing their attention further down the corridor and away from where Korvax was hiding. He talked about nothing and everything, keeping his voice steady, keeping their eyes on him. He had learned long ago that confused enemies were slower enemies. When he judged the distance was right, Daniel grabbed a fire suppression lever on the wall and pulled it hard. A blast of white foam exploded from nozzles above, filling the corridor with thick, blinding spray. The Krithaks screeched and flailed, their compound eyes useless in the chemical fog. Daniel ran. Not away from the Krithaks, but around them, using the fog as cover. He grabbed Korvax's hand as he passed and pulled the prince into a side tunnel that the enemies would never find in the confusion. They kept moving, through ducts and shafts and forgotten spaces. Korvax was exhausted, his small legs struggling to keep up, but he did not complain. He trusted Daniel, and Daniel would not let him down. Finally, they reached a secondary command center near the bottom of the ship. It was designed as a backup in case the main bridge was destroyed. It had thick walls, heavy doors, and its own communication system. Most importantly, it was empty. The Krithaks had not found it yet. Daniel sealed the doors behind them and activated the emergency beacon. A signal went out to the bridge, letting the Empress know where they were. Then he turned to Korvax and knelt down to meet the prince's eyes. You did well, Daniel said. You were brave and strong, and you never gave up. I am proud of you. Korvax's scales flickered through a dozen colors. I was scared the whole time. Being brave does not mean not being scared. Being brave means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. The prince considered this for a moment. Then he wrapped his arms around Daniel and held on tight. It was a human gesture, one Daniel had taught him. A hug, a way of showing love without words. Daniel hugged him back and tried not to think about what would happen when those doors finally opened. Because he could hear the footsteps now. Heavy, clicking footsteps. The Krithaks had found them. The doors shuddered as something slammed against them from outside. The metal groaned but held. Another impact. Then another. The hinges began to bend. Daniel stood up and placed himself between Korvax and the door. He had no weapon. He had no plan. He had nothing but his body and his stubborn human refusal to let a child be hurt. The door gave way. Krithak soldiers poured through the opening, their claws raised and their eyes burning with hunger. Daniel did not move. He did not run. He stood firm and met their gaze with the same calm he had shown in every moment of this terrible night. You will have to go through me, he said quietly, and I will not make it easy. The lead Krithaks raised its claw to strike. Daniel braced himself for pain that would end everything. And then the ceiling exploded. The summons came at dawn. 2 armored guards appeared at Daniel's door, their scales a deep crimson that meant barely controlled anger. They did not speak. They did not need to. The message was clear in the way they gripped their weapons and stared at Daniel with open contempt. He was to come with them immediately. Resistance would be met with force. Daniel dressed quickly and followed them through the ship. They walked for what felt like miles, passing through corridors he had never seen before. The walls grew wider. The ceilings grew higher. The metal became polished and decorated with symbols of conquest and victory. They were entering the heart of the flagship, the domain of the Empress herself. The war chamber was the largest room Daniel had ever seen on any ship. It could have held 1,000 humans standing shoulder to shoulder. Massive columns rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Holographic displays showed the positions of fleets across the Dominion's territory. And at the far end, seated on a throne carved from the bones of some great beast, was Empress Cirith Voldad. She was magnificent and terrible. Her scales were a deep purple that shifted to black in the shadows, and her golden eyes burned with an intelligence that had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds. She wore armor even on her throne, as if she expected battle at any moment. When she saw Daniel enter, her scales flushed red, and her voice filled the chamber like thunder. "Why is my battle heir in your quarters, human?" The words echoed off the walls. Around the chamber, dozens of Velthri officers and advisors stood watching. Their scales showed a mix of colors: curiosity, anger, anticipation. They were expecting a show, and Daniel was the main attraction. He walked forward until he stood alone in the center of the great room. His heart was pounding, but he kept his step steady and his face calm. Years of dealing with angry parents and difficult administrators had taught him that showing fear only made things worse. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head slightly in respect, "I am honored to stand before you. Do not waste my time with pleasantries." The Empress rose from her throne and descended the steps toward him. Each footstep rang against the stone floor. "Commander Draxus has informed me that my son has been visiting your quarters in secret, every night for weeks. He claims you have been corrupting the air with human weakness." She stopped just feet away, towering over Daniel like a mountain of scales and fury. "Explain yourself, now." Daniel took a breath. He had known this moment would come eventually. He had prepared for it in his mind 100 times. But facing the reality of an alien empress who could order his death with a single word was different from anything he had imagined. "Your son came to me seeking refuge," Daniel said clearly. "He was frightened and alone. I offered him warmth and kindness. That is all." A murmur ran through the watching crowd. The Empress's scales flickered with confusion. "Kindness," she repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "You showed kindness to my heir. And what did you expect to gain from this kindness?" "Nothing, Your Majesty." "Kindness does not require payment." More murmurs. The concept seemed to baffle the assembled Velthri. They looked at each other with expressions Daniel could not quite read. "You lie." Commander Draxus stepped forward from the crowd, his scales dark with accusation. "No creature acts without purpose. You sought to influence the heir, to turn him against his people, to weaken the Dominion from within." "I sought nothing of the kind," Daniel replied. He turned to face Draxus directly, meeting the commander's hostile gaze without flinching. "I saw a child who was hurting, and I helped him. That is what humans do. We protect children. All children, not just our own." Before anyone could respond, the doors to the chamber opened again. 4 guards entered, escorting a small figure between them. Prince Korvax looked even smaller in this vast room, surrounded by warriors and watched by his mother's burning eyes. His scales were pale with fear, but he walked with his head held high. "You sent for me, Mother," he said, his young voice steady despite his obvious terror. "I did." The Empress turned her attention to her son. "Tell me what has happened between you and this human. Tell me everything." Korvax looked at Daniel. Something passed between them in that glance. An understanding. A decision. Then the prince did something that made the entire chamber gasp. He stepped forward, placing himself between Daniel and his mother. His small body barely reached Daniel's chest, but he stood like a shield between the human and the Empress of the Velthri Dominion. "Daniel has done nothing wrong," Korvax said. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. He taught me things no Valkyrie ever taught me. He showed me that strength is not just about fighting. He helped me understand why I should want to be strong, instead of just fearing being weak. The Empress stared at her son as if seeing him for the first time. Her scales shifted through colors too fast to follow. "You defend this human," she said slowly. "You stand against your own mother, your own people. For an alien who has been among us for mere weeks, I stand for what is right." Korvax's scales finally settled on a color Daniel recognized. Blue, the color of happiness, the color of courage. Daniel taught me that being right matters more than being safe. He taught me that true leaders protect the weak instead of punishing them. He taught me that I do not have to be ashamed of being small, because the smallest creature can have the biggest heart. Silence filled the chamber. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Commander Draxus snarled and stepped toward Daniel. "Enough of this foolishness. The human has clearly poisoned the prince's mind. He must be executed immediately, and the heir must be re-educated until this contamination is purged. You will not touch him." Every eye turned to Korvax. The young prince's scales were blazing now, brighter than Daniel had ever seen them. He faced Commander Draxus with a fury that seemed too large for his small body. "You have beaten me and mocked me, and told me I was worthless since I was old enough to hold a training blade," Korvax continued. "You never taught me. You only broke me, again and again. And when someone finally showed me what real teaching looks like, you call it corruption." He pointed at Draxus with a trembling claw. "You are the weak one, Commander. You are afraid of a child who finally learned to stand up." Draxus raised his hand as if to strike the prince. But before he could move, another sound filled the chamber. A sound that froze everyone in place. Alarms, loud and urgent. The holographic displays around the room flickered and changed, showing new data. Enemy ships, dozens of them, emerging from faster-than-light travel directly into the system. "The Krithax," someone shouted. "A full invasion fleet. They are heading directly for us." The Empress turned away from Daniel and her son, her attention immediately captured by this new threat. Officers rushed to their stations. Orders flew through the air. The war chamber transformed from a place of judgment to a command center in seconds. But in the chaos, Daniel caught the Empress's eye one last time. She looked at him, then at her son, still standing protectively in front of the human. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not yet, but something like doubt. Something like the first crack in a wall that had stood for centuries. Then the first explosion shook the ship, and there was no more time for anything but survival. Daniel Cooper had been on the Valkyrie flagship for 3 weeks, and in that time, not a single alien had spoken to him with anything close to warmth. The massive ship was home to over 10,000 Valkyrie warriors, and every one of them looked at Daniel like he was something stuck to the bottom of their clawed feet. He was a cultural liaison officer, sent as part of a new diplomatic exchange program between humanity and the Valkyrie Dominion. It was supposed to be an honor. It felt like a punishment. The Valkyrie were impressive creatures. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scaled skin that shifted colors based on their moods. Their eyes were golden and slitted, and their faces were shaped like the ancient dinosaurs from Earth's history books. They were proud, fierce, and they had ruled their corner of the galaxy for over 6,000 years. Humans, by comparison, had only discovered faster-than-light travel 40 years ago. To the Valkyrie, humans were barely worth noticing. Daniel's quarters reflected his status perfectly. He had been given a small room in a forgotten section of the ship, far from the grand halls where important decisions were made. The walls were bare metal, the bed was too short, and the air always smelled faintly of engine oil. But Daniel did not complain. He had learned long ago that complaining only made things worse before joining the diplomatic corps. Daniel had been an elementary school teacher in a small town in Ohio. He had spent 12 years working with children, teaching them to read, helping them through hard days, and learning that patience was the most powerful tool anyone could possess. When the opportunity came to represent humanity among the stars, he had jumped at it. He wanted to see what was out there. He wanted to help build bridges between worlds. So far, the only bridge he had built was between his bed and the small food dispenser in the corner of his room. It was late in the ship's night cycle when Daniel heard the noise. He had been reading a book on his tablet, trying to improve his understanding of Veltari history, when a soft scraping sound came from the corridor outside. He set the tablet down and listened. The sound came again, followed by something that might have been a whimper. Daniel opened his door carefully and looked out into the dim hallway. The lights were set low during night cycle, casting long shadows across the metal floor. At first, he saw nothing. Then he noticed a small shape huddled in a storage alcove about 20 feet away. It was a Veltari child. Daniel had seen the young prince once before, during a formal ceremony on his first day aboard. Prince Korvax Vol was the only child of Empress Sirith Vol, the ruler of the entire Veltari dominion. He was the battle heir, destined to one day command fleets and conquer worlds. But the small figure hiding in the shadows did not look like a future conqueror. He looked scared and sad and very, very young. Daniel approached slowly, keeping his movements gentle and his voice soft. He had learned from years of teaching that frightened children needed calm, not demands. "Hello there," he said quietly. "Are you all right?" The prince looked up with wide golden eyes. His scales were a dull gray color, which Daniel had learned meant distress in Veltari. Up close, Korvax was even smaller than Daniel had realized. By Veltari standards, he was about 12 cycles old, which translated roughly to a human 8-year-old. He was tiny for his species, barely reaching Daniel's chest. "You are the human," Korvax said. His voice was thin and shaky. "I am," Daniel replied. "My name is Daniel, and you are Prince Korvax, if I remember correctly." The prince flinched at his own name, as if it was a word that brought him pain. "I should not be here. I should not be talking to you. If they find me, I will be punished." "Who will punish you?" "Everyone." The word came out as barely a whisper. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He knew that feeling. He had seen it many times in children who carry burdens too heavy for their small shoulders. He lowered himself to one knee so he was closer to the prince's eye level. "I am not going to tell anyone you are here," Daniel said. "But it is cold in this hallway, and you look like you could use something warm to drink. Would you like to come inside for a little while?" Korvax stared at him with an expression Daniel could not quite read. Confusion, maybe, or disbelief. "Why would you offer me anything? I am nothing to you. You are a child who is upset and alone in a dark hallway," Daniel said simply. "That is enough reason for me." For a long moment, the prince did not move. Then, slowly, he nodded and followed Daniel into his small quarters. Daniel prepared 2 cups of heated broth from his food dispenser. It was not much, but it was warm and filling. He handed one to Korvax, who took it with trembling claws. They sat on the floor because Daniel only had one chair, and it seemed wrong to sit above a frightened child. "Do you want to tell me why you are hiding in storage alcoves in the middle of the night?" Daniel asked. Korvax wrapped his claws around the warm cup and stared into the liquid. "I failed again today. In combat training, Commander Draxus says I am weak. He says I am a disgrace to my bloodline. He says my mother should have had another heir, one worthy of the throne." Daniel felt a flash of anger at a grown adult saying such things to a child. But he kept his voice calm. "That sounds like a very hard thing to hear." "It is the truth," Korvax said flatly. "I am small. I am slow. I cannot fight like the others. I will never be the warrior my mother needs me to be. What do you want to be? The question seemed to confuse the prince. His scales flickered with a color Daniel did not recognize. I do not understand. I asked what you want to be. Not what your mother wants or what your commanders want. What does Korvax want? The silence stretched on for so long that Daniel thought he might not answer. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost, the prince said, I do not know. No one has ever asked me that before. Before Daniel could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. A patrol. Korvax's scales went pale with fear. They cannot find me here, he whispered. If they know I was talking to a human, hiding like a coward, my mother will be furious. Daniel thought quickly. His quarters were small, but there was a narrow space behind the storage unit where a small Velthri child could fit. He pointed to it. Hide there. Stay quiet. I will handle this. Korvax hesitated for just a moment. Then he moved, fast and silent, and disappeared into the shadows. Daniel picked up his tablet and tried to look bored as the patrol passed by his door. They did not stop. They did not even glance inside. Why would they? He was just a human. Nobody important. Nobody worth watching. When the footsteps faded, Korvax emerged from his hiding spot. He looked at Daniel with something new in his golden eyes. Something that might have been the first small seed of trust. Thank you, the prince said. You are welcome, Daniel replied. Now finish your broth. It is getting cold. Neither of them knew it then, but that small act of kindness in a forgotten corner of a great warship had just changed the fate of an empire. The visits became a pattern. Every night, after the ship's lights dimmed and the corridors grew quiet, Korvax would slip away from his royal quarters and make his way to the forgotten section where Daniel lived. At first, the prince came only to escape. But as the days turned into weeks, he started coming for something more. He came because, for the first time in his young life, someone treated him like a child instead of a future weapon. Daniel learned many things about Velthri culture during those late-night visits, and most of what he learned broke his heart. The Velthri had no concept of childhood as humans understood it. There were no games, no toys, no bedtime stories. From the moment a Velthri child could walk, they were trained. They learned to fight, to strategize, to endure pain without showing weakness. Failure was met with punishment. Success was met with harder challenges. Love was never spoken of. It was considered a weakness that enemies could exploit. Korvax had never played a game in his life. He did not know what the word meant. Daniel decided to change that. On the fourth night, he taught the prince a simple card game using a deck he had brought from Earth. Korvax was confused at first. He did not understand why anyone would do something that had no purpose, no training value, no way to make him stronger. But Daniel explained that play was how humans learn to think, to adapt, to solve problems in new ways. It was not weakness. It was practice for the mind. By the end of the night, Korvax had won 3 rounds. His scales had turned a bright shade of blue, a color Daniel had never seen on him before. What does that color mean? Daniel asked, pointing to the prince's arm. Korvax looked down at himself with surprise. I do not know. I have never made this color before. It took Daniel a moment to realize what he was seeing. The prince was happy. And he was so unfamiliar with the feeling that he did not even recognize it in his own body. On the 7th night, Daniel taught Korvax about stories. He told the prince a simple tale from Earth, about a small rabbit who outsmarted a much larger fox through cleverness and courage. Korvax listened with his golden eyes wide, his scales shifting through colors. Daniel was learning to read. Wonder, excitement, and at the end, when the rabbit escaped to safety, something that looked almost like relief. The rabbit was weak, Korvax said slowly. But he won. Yes, Daniel agreed. Strength is not always about size or power. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is think clearly when everyone else is panicking. The prince was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "Tell me another one." Daniel told him 3 more stories that night. He told him about clever mice and brave children and ordinary people who did extraordinary things, not because they were powerful, but because they refused to give up. Korvax drank in every word like he was dying of thirst, and Daniel's stories were watered on the 12th night. Something happened that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. He had just finished explaining the concept of jokes, which Korvax found very strange, when Daniel made a silly face and said something absurd about a talking fish. And Korvax laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was a small, startled sound, like the prince had surprised himself by making it. His scales flashed through a dozen colors at once, and he pressed his claws to his mouth, as if trying to push the sound back inside. "What was that?" Korvax asked, his voice tight with worry. "What is wrong with me? Am I sick?" Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes, but he kept his voice steady. "No, little one, you are not sick." That was laughter. It is what humans do when something makes them happy. Laughter. Korvax repeated the word like it was something sacred. It felt strange, but not bad. Does it happen often? For most humans, yes. Every day. The prince considered this with the seriousness of a scholar studying ancient texts. "I think I would like to do it again." So Daniel told more jokes. Bad ones, mostly. The kind that made children groan and roll their eyes. But Korvax laughed at every single one. That small, startled sound that grew a little stronger each time. And for the first time since arriving on the Velthary flagship, Daniel felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. As the weeks passed, Daniel noticed changes in the prince. Korvax stood a little taller. His scales were brighter. He spoke with more confidence, though still only when they were alone together. And according to the rumors Daniel overheard in the corridors, the prince's performance in his official training had improved dramatically. Daniel knew why. It was not because of the games or the stories, though those helped. It was because Korvax was finally sleeping through the night. It was because he was eating properly instead of picking at his food. It was because, for a few hours each day, he was allowed to just be a child, instead of carrying the weight of an empire on his small shoulders. But their secret could not last forever. Commander Draxis was the prince's chief combat tutor, a massive Velthary warrior with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that held no warmth. He had noticed the changes in Korvax, and unlike the other tutors, he was not pleased. A stronger prince meant a prince who might one day question his methods. A confident heir was harder to control than a broken one. Draxis began watching the prince more closely. He noted the times when Korvax disappeared. He tracked the patterns, the routes, the excuses. And one night, hiding in the shadows of a maintenance corridor, he finally saw what he had been looking for. Prince Korvax Val, battle heir to the Velthary Dominion, slipping out of the quarters of the human liaison officer. The prince was smiling. His scales were that strange blue color that Draxis had never seen before. The commander's own scales flushed dark with fury. He did not know what the human had done to corrupt the heir, but he intended to find out. And when he did, the soft little alien would learn what happened to those who interfered with the future of the Dominion. Draxis turned and walked toward the bridge, toward the quarters of the Empress herself. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridor like the drums of war. In his small room, Daniel was teaching Korvax how to fold paper into the shape of a bird. Neither of them heard the commander's departure. Neither of them knew that their peaceful nights together had just come to an end. Tomorrow, there would be a reckoning. But tonight there was only a man and a child, folding paper and laughing softly in the dim light of a forgotten room, building something precious in a universe that did not believe such things could exist.